Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc are about to be scrappy as hell. So, welcome back to the Astrological Pit Stop, which is a podcast where we talk about astrology and Formula One racing. If you're watching on YouTube and not listening to the podcast, ignore the fact I'm wearing sunglasses because it's very bright and I also like Death Warmed Up. So, I have accurately predicted Lewis Hamilton's rise and also some of Charles Leclerc's sort of flip-flop behaviour. We're going to talk about that as a reflection, and then we're going to look forward to what's happening for the rest of the season. So, I predicted Lewis Hamilton's rise back in November 2025 on a TikTok where I said I don't think people are prepared or ready for this type of rise. I also included it in my YouTube video where I talked about Destiny Matrix. I kind of likened Lewis to a phoenix rising from the ashes. And of course I see a lot of people saying, who would have thought that Lewis was going to claw his way back? I did, right? And he's put the work in, he deserves that accolade, but also astrologically and Destiny Matrix wise, we knew that he was going to have a really successful year. That's because he entered the 15 energy. Now, this is the energy he was in when he won his first championship. When you replicate energy, it's really very strong. Also, interesting, the devil is 15, which is Capricorn, his sun. And if anyone's noticed, Lewis actually has a Capricorn tattoo. So tattoos can act as sigils. So I feel like he's actually invoked his own sigil and he is the Capricorn. Well, what's the Capricorn? The goat. He is the goat, right? It's the sea goat as well. So it has earthy energy, but also quite intuitive. I also talked about the devil being excess. So that can be public scrutiny. So we can see that with Kim Kardashian. I actually did a video about how this public scrutiny aligns to Kim Kardashian, because whether you like her or not, she does attract a level of scrutiny because, she doesn't really match Lewis's values. And I guess there's lots of reasons, a whole host of reasons, but I'm not really going to get into that. I also talked about Lewis stepping up, being more of a stepdad, because the North Node in Pisces was not only conjunct his natal Venus, which is his love planet, so that means a deepening of a bond, but it was also in his fifth house of play and children. It's now moved into Aquarius in the fourth house of home and family, where you really settle down. And I think he's pretty much established himself as a partner for Kim long term, and he's also recently got a new dog. Now, this also aligns to Charles Leclerc, who had the North Node in Pisces, fifth house, going into fourth, and of course Alexandra, which is his wife, is pregnant. And even though they haven't announced it, she's very clearly pregnant. She is pregnant. I'd say she's actually due in just a few months. So congrats to him. That's amazing news. But I did also do a video about that, predicting the pregnancy. So a few things have come true that I predicted that I felt were quite obvious. And I think it's interesting that these two drivers are in the same team, got a similar type of destiny. So let's look at this from a standpoint of what's been correct and what's been sort of wrong, and then moving on to the future. So for Lewis, I accurately predicted his win in Barcelona based on a Mercury-Moon conjunction. I just felt very sentimental and really lovely. When Mercury was retrograde for the next few races, he did not do as well, and he was getting slapped with penalties left and right because he had a whole host of squares. Now, we know that squares create tension, particularly because they're often to Saturn. So for him, that's causing lots of penalties and restriction. I think the penalties, for the most part, have been his fault, and I think he admits as such, but some have been unfair. I always find it frustrating when he will get penalised for something that another driver gets away with easily. It feels it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, doesn't it, for various reasons. I think we know why. But it's just not fair. And, it's quite frustrating as well, because sometimes you can have a really good chart and you think this looks harmonious, but you can see a penalty coming. And you might have noticed in the past few videos, I've been very hesitant to say he was going to win or do well, because I see the penalties, I see the restriction, and I think, oh, good God, what's this now? It's not speeding in the pit lane. It's getting penalised for someone else hitting into you. It's like, well, what's that got to do with me? What's that got to do with two twigs and a fag is what I call it. So I do feel like Lewis has been unfairly penalised. The next thing is that Lewis has also had a injection or a psychological overhaul of how he feels about his confidence. That fan that was like, remember who you are. Maybe that's the trigger. Maybe that was the reason the Destiny Matrix is aligning to 15. Maybe we needed that fan to say, remember who you are. You were in a dark place last year. He was in what we call a material karma year. oof, not nice. When a year like that comes to your door, you just got to accept it and move on. And luckily he did persevere, and now we're seeing much better results. He's actually second in the championship, which is fantastic. He's 50 points currently at the time of recording behind Kimi Antonelli. And all these people saying, who would have thought? I did. I see you, Lewis. I've been here since the beginning. I see your potential. I'm excited as well because the next 2 years are number 10 and 15, so he ain't going nowhere. He's continuing to fight for this championship, and he's going to do it. So, a lot of people have been asking me, is Lewis going to win this year? I have always wanted to say yes, I think he will, but I cannot. I just can't. Based on looking at the other drivers' charts, I can't in good conscience say, yes, he's going to win. I think it could be very similar to Max Verstappen last year, which I also predicted, by the way. Getting by maybe a couple of points away or still just being second in the championship. The reason being is that I see more penalties and more what I call dogfights for him. So rather than breaking down each race by race, because that's what I do my weekly videos for, I'm going to show you the landscape of what's coming up. Now, Lewis is going to be in the 15 energy all the way until the end of the season, so he does not change that. That gives us a good indicator of where he's at, continuing this sort of successful run. One thing I will say is his chart is always marred by some kind of restriction or another, whether it's, you get a win, but it's an absolute dogfight, or you're getting hit with 5-second penalties and you're having to claw yourself back. So Zandvoort is the next race. I'm not going to go into that, but it looks okay to me. One thing I will say, and I want to track and be mindful of, Monza. I mentioned in my last video, I think Monza's a dogfight for him. You've got Mars in Cancer, exactly conjunct natal moon in Cancer. Talking about putting a fire up your ass and in your brain. That's like when you throw a candle behind me. Can't believe you do that to me. It's quite aggressive. Mars is the chart ruler here, allegedly. One thing I have to say allegedly is because Lewis's chart's not being confirmed. It's a D rating, which means that it's not confirmed at all. What we are doing is looking at transit planets like the moon, for example, or transit luminary in this case, when it's conjunct, opposite, square, one of his more slower moving planets like Saturn. That will give us a good indicator. We just don't know what houses it's in. So I can't say, yes, it's definitely going to be Mars in the 9th house, because we don't know that. So we're just looking at the conjunction itself. Now, of course, when you've got Mars, which rules like mechanical parts and its regression, and it's really good for driving on top of your moon, it makes you very aggressive. The reason why I talked about that is because if Kimi does take his engine penalty, it gives Lewis more of a chance to really claw those points. So he's going to be really aggressive and on the attack. So this does look a bit of a dogfight for him. It's not the worst thing in the world. I don't think it's like, this is tragic. It actually could be quite victorious for him, but it's certainly not going to be an easy race, that's for sure. One thing that is going to change the game for both Lewis and Charles, maybe even Kimi too, if they're all indeed Scorpio risings, is we have a Venus retrograde taking place from October to November. So with a Venus retrograde, it's a time to reconsider our relationship. So this could be a reconsideration of what's going on with his relationship with Kim. But Venus is also a material assets and what we own. It's how we feel about ourselves. If you're a Scorpio rising, it's in the 1st house, so it's going to be how you feel about yourself, your self-confidence. And so when it's retrograding, it can really be a feeling of not feeling good enough, or being like, where do I want to be here? What kind of legacy do I want to leave behind? That Venus retrograde is teetering very close to Lewis's natal Saturn, which is that planet of restriction and boundary, but also commitment. So this could be a time for him to really commit. It could be a time to say, no, I need to pull away. We never really know how it's going to play out, really. Again, we need to look at the houses and know that they are accurate. But ultimately, that's going to be a difficult spanner in the works, because Venus is not only in a way victorious, it's also about harmony. So people are not working in accordance. Scorpio is a slow knife. And in fact, Scorpio is all about analytics and data. So it also shows that there is a lack of harmony between the people that are feeding you your data and you actually interpreting it. So maybe issues with engineers, people just not getting things correct. Now, the next thing that also takes place during this, particularly late October, is a Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. Mercury in Scorpio is like a detective energy. So it really feels like you want the fine edge of a fart and you're really sort of like trying to pick things. So again, could find a lot of delays or issues with engineering, components, things not working. Now that Mercury retrograde is going to be on top of his Saturn, particularly around the 25th of October. So that can be miscommunication that causes penalties, restrictions. So it doesn't look too good. And I did mention this earlier in the year about this Venus and Mercury retrograde coming together. Is it the end of the world? No, you can absolutely still get points and still do fairly well. But if I'm looking at somebody who I want to be a champion, this is not the type of energy I want to be looking at. Yes, we know that Kimmy's going to have this as well, but every chart has a different kind of energy. For example, with Kimmy, he's also got Jupiter conjunct Saturn and Venus. So he's got a certain element of pushing and being disciplined, but getting a certain level of reward from it too. There's always something harmonious in the chart that works well, and this is why I'm saying I don't think he's going to drop off a cliff or anything like that. I think he will continue to do well in that 15 energy. My point is I just don't think we should get our hopes up, because we do have quite a bit of restriction, and it's not necessarily, oh, you have a Mercury retrograde, that's all she wrote. Again, if it's very close to a natal Saturn, particularly a Saturn, that's in Scorpio, you're really going to be penalized for the smallest things, because Scorpio is really about detail. Scorpio is literally the phrase that which is hidden from view. So it'll often be something that you don't realize until later on. You think you've won and then, oh, it's a mistake. Or it's like that Oscar moment when, is it like Moonlight won? And they were like, oh, that's La La Land, and everyone, or the opposite way around. It was a really embarrassing moment. There's lots of information that you don't realize till after, or something goes wrong with the car. Oh, okay, we realized, we went back to the factory, we talked about this, we know what the issue is. And then it sort of goes back and forth, back and forth. Similar to kind of what George is having now, where lots of things going wrong with the car, having to feed it back and saying, right, now we've learned from the issue. So it's not really Lewis's driving that's the problem. It's more probably little things, particularly on the engineering side, that may affect him. And, also a lot of these issues are in a way quite similar to Charles' chart, because they're both in Ferrari. So it could be quite literally a manufacturing problem, not a driver issue. So my prediction at the start of the year was that Lewis was going to enter the energy he was in when he won his first championship, and so he would have a phoenix rise, but I never said he would win the championship. In fact, I quite literally said he wouldn't. But would he get very close to winning it? Yes. I'm very happy to be proven wrong if he wins. Bloody hell. Okay, amazing. But again, lots of races to go. Let's see how we are. If we think he's going to do better, we assess the chart, we keep looking at it. I'm purposely being a bit sort of brief with this, because I don't want to bore anybody, and I know a lot of people have asked me for a brief overview, but each race week we will talk about it in detail. We will feed back the data, we'll say what worked, what didn't. Yes, okay, maybe this transit works, and then we'll kind of assess. But in my humble opinion, I don't think he's winning this championship, but he might get pretty damn close. Okay, let's look at Charles Leclerc. So Charles had a very mixed year all over the shop. He's actually in number 10 energy in Destiny Matrix, which is the Wheel of Fortune. That is pretty much all over the shop. I mean, it's a wheel. You spin it, see what you're going to get. It could be something lucky, maybe not, right? Very fated. It also tends to be about a fated conclusion, so you do learn something about yourself. I tend to think this is better for your personal life, and of course he got married privately. He's yet to have the civil wedding, and as I mentioned just earlier in this video, Alexandra Leclerc is pregnant. So, which we predicted already. So I did mention that it was going to be more of a personal success than a career one. Now, for Charles, in October, he's entering the number 10 energy again. So he's got replicated energy. Doesn't mean that it's going to be the same year over and over again, but the Wheel of Fortune is a tough one to deal with, because if you don't step out the hamster wheel, you will keep repeating it. The loop will repeat until you close it, until you jump out of it, right? So I really want Charles to be making changes pretty much consistently. I don't want him to be like, it's not my fault, or it's this or that. I want to see tangible changes, because if we do not see any changes, we do not see any development or growth, we're going to have the same year over and over again, and we really don't want that. So for Charles at the start of the year, I think it did pretty well. I think he was achieving podiums, and we also felt the sense that he was doing a little bit better than Lewis, and of course Lewis started catching up, and then it became a bit of a fight within Ferrari, and there was that kind of phrase that Charles was fighting his teammate, and actually he should be focusing on just winning and doing something else. Now for Charles, his driving ability really came into question around Monaco time, when he crashed at his home race. People were calling him a fraud. They were like, il predestinato, I don't think, and I saw multiple videos being made about him saying, this guy's a fraud. He's never as good as we thought he was. 8-9 wins in this amount of time. Ridiculous, right? So, I imagine that had been quite tough for him. He also had a lot of squares to his natal moon, and he's also going through a Saturn return. Saturn return is really quite difficult for him in the 6th house, where you feel very responsible for others. You feel like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. And of course, the 6th house is very related to physical chains and feeling a slave to others' opinions, to your own insecurities, and to Saturn itself, the planet of restriction. So in that regard, it can feel really quite oppressive. He's not the only driver going through a Saturn return. George and Max are too, also not doing that well, in my opinion. So for Charles, he had quite a tough run of it, all of which I've predicted. The only chart I said I really freaking loved was Silverstone, and of course he won. So I do think there's some quite strong evidence in his chart when he does well. Others when I can see some emotional volatility. Unfortunately, when you have an Aries moon, you're always going to be a little bit more hot-headed. And that's not me saying he's an aggressive person by any means. He seems like a really lovely guy. I think he says he's quite calm and friendly and happy outside of work. So I don't doubt that. But I feel he's his own worst enemy. And I think he's probably got a lot of psychological pressure that I don't think he's dealt with. It's quite evident in his aura. You can see it in his eyes sometimes when he's speaking. I'm just like, oh, I can see it coming out your eyes, baby boy, So I do think that he's got, in a way, a psychological battle to really face. Like Kendrick Lamar says, it's a lifelong battle with yourself, because I think his driving ability is perfectly fine. Of course he makes mistakes like every driver does, but he's certainly up there, isn't he? So I think it's more of a psychological issue than anything. So for the rest of the season, we know that Charles is below the standings here. He's below George. He's not at the same level as Lewis, which, again, must be psychologically difficult. I'd find it, maybe this is just me, but I'd be like, fuck you. I'd be like, how dare you just come in and take this from me? But again, it's racing, right? And it's very dog eat dog. So Lewis is a 7-time world champion. You're not going to just expect him to not do well. So I think it's about upping your game and making sure that you're really seen as equals here. So for the rest of the season, it looks very aggressive on Charles' part, particularly for Zandvoort, Monza, Madrid and Baku. All look pretty aggressive for him. And just before the mid-season break, I did predict Charles being quite aggressive in a few races beforehand, and of course he was. Even other commentators were saying, there's no need for that. So you can see aggression in the chart quite evident for him. Doesn't mean he doesn't win or he doesn't do well, but it just shows that he's just on the defensive and an attack. And of course, when you see defense and aggression in a chart, well, what does that mean? Well, that might also mean that somebody crashes and then there's a safety car, which affects other people. So, for example, that would then affect Lewis's chart, and there's a penalty and a Saturn placement there. So everything is sort of interlinked here. So, of course, when George was hit by Lewis, before the mid-season break, I also predicted that there was going to be a safety car that affected everybody and impeded someone like Kimi's race. Doesn't mean he doesn't win, but just that it becomes more difficult to deal with. So you can see those kinds of impediments in the chart too. So Charles also has Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde just like Lewis, but he has a slightly better October because Jupiter is going to be conjunct his natal MC in Leo. So this is a time of great victory and being really well known for what you're doing. It's quite a talent, actually. It's rather than being fraud watch, it's more like, oh, we really mistook this guy. He's really clawed himself back up. So I think Charles could have a particularly successful October, particularly around Singapore. I don't want to say it just yet, but I think he could even win Singapore. But it definitely looks pretty good around that time. So we also know that there's going to be no Bahrain GP. It's going to be replaced by a Malaysian GP. So we have Malaysia and Singapore. I think he could do very well at these two tracks, particularly Singapore. But he will still face the problem with Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde, except they will not be over a natal Saturn like Lewis. So again, Lewis just has more restriction. Whether this is his own problem, whether it's FIA taunting him, speculating wise, allegedly, all those words, all those buzzwords, I don't really know. So I do think he has more of a chance in October. But this is what I mean by Lewis having a bit of a dogfight. It's like not necessarily that you don't do well. It's just that you really have to put in more effort than you thought. Like second the championship, yeah, you're probably not going to take foot off the gas and rest. But it's also going to be a bit more like dubious if then your teammates really starting to catch up and you're like, oh Jesus Christ, you're in my rear mirror, what's going on here? So then it becomes even more oppressive for you, and like I said, then it becomes a dogfight. So I do think there's going to be an intriguing kind of mix there. November looks super aggressive, but in a successful way. Like he's really making a push for it. So I think Charles could do quite well October, November. I'm not going to lie. If I'm looking at the chart, there's obviously things that I don't like, and we'll talk about it weekly and we'll get into it. But he definitely has a much better end of season than a start of the season. But I'll come back to this and probably freaking wrong, it'll be opposite. But it does look slightly better for him. I also think he's really managing some wounds here. Also, just wanted to say, because of Alexandra being pregnant, which is amazing, I think he will have multiple children for sure. He has Jupiter in Aquarius in his 4th house, and the North Node is going to be going over it. So I think they'll have some multiple babies, and I think that will be really nice for them. Okay, so that was my sort of brief, I say brief, nearly half an hour, roundup and reflection of the mid-season, which is that Lewis had a complete rise. He's phoenix from the ashes, very proud of him. Charles had a bit of a mixed bag, was okay, did not do well, and then much better to the point where, okay, you know, we can maybe delete some of those fraud videos. And now for the rest of the season, Lewis is going to be really focused, very disciplined. One thing I really like about Lewis's Saturn and Scorpio and the aspects that are being made to it for the rest of the season is that he really shows his veteran status here. He's going to be showing why he's so good at what he does. Like 7-time world champion ain't for nothing, right? So even though Kimi's doing amazing at the moment, we haven't really had a chance to see much of his racecraft, particularly in other cars in F1. And it does feel like Lewis is being slapped with penalties left and right, but he has a certain level of wisdom that just cannot be replicated, and that's why he's got value. Like if we looked at Lewis using a business framework like the Rio framework, his value comes from his experience. His rarity comes from the amount of championships he's got. You can't imitate him because he's so unique, both in personality and driving style, and how he fits within an organization is interesting because he's basically worked in McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, so he's able to have variety and diversity. So he's got sustained competitive advantage as a driver, which I really love, and you can see that in his chart. So even if he does face obstacles, he's doing bloody brilliant, and I think he should be proud of himself. I do think Charles is going to have a better end of the season, particularly around October and November. Could be quite scrappy and aggressive in August and September, so maybe a bit more challenging, maybe more mistakes being made, but there's more harmony towards sort of the Asian races like Malaysia, Singapore and whatnot. But do I think he's going to win? No, I do not. But, you know, I think it won't be a bad year, just one for him to reflect on. Again, I think it's more psychological pressure and that Saturn return that's being more of an issue. Okay, well, please let me know what you think. What are your predictions? Like, do you think this is right? Are you like, no, I definitely think Lewis is going to win? Like, let me know. Everyone's probably got different opinions about it based on energy that they feel. Some people have a feeling, don't they? And they're good, like, I just know. And then the next video, we're going to talk about Mercedes, which is George and Kimi. And we're really going to get into George's Saturn return. And we're also going to be reflecting on the charts for each of Kimi's wins and showing you those transits too. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye.